How can you be traumatized by something that never even happened to you? Trauma is typically a response in your body and brain to a highly distressing event, but it can happen to people with psychosis in reaction to things that aren't real. We experience things so viscerally that even though it didn't happen, we're still psychologically affected. Please excuse my skin today. I have heat intolerance from Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it's pretty hard to hide. We are finally in full swing of the spring season here in Washington State, and it hasn't been fun for me, although I am enjoying the warmer weather. So anyway, PTSD and psychosis. I don't really hear this talked about very much. I think that's because a lot of people who have experienced psychosis are in maybe denial. They don't accept what happened. They don't really count it as trauma because it wasn't real. And likewise, a lot of mental health professionals probably don't see it as traumatic because it wasn't real. But the truth is that to people experiencing psychosis, there's no differentiating. It is so realistic that you are on some level experiencing it. You are experiencing it as it really would happen in real life. The only difference is that you probably just can't touch it physically. But if you're seeing people murdered in front of you, you're going to experience that the same way as if those people were actually real. And I guess that's a good place for me to throw in a trigger warning and say that if hearing people being murdered in front of you is upsetting, you probably want to leave this video, because I will be talking about traumatic things that have happened to me, and they're not pretty. So as far as experiencing things fully, experiencing things that you share like the actual kind of experience you would have outside of psychosis, things I've experienced that were that real were pretty standard things, like believing that my grandfather had died. So I had the experience of grieving his death, even though he was alive. That I think is understandable, that if you really believed that, it would make sense that you'd have the experience of grief. And I likewise had this with delusions of being pregnant. I bonded with unborn children that were never real. So I had relationships with people that were never there. And I felt like I was pregnant. So I had the experience of pregnancy despite never having been pregnant. And I'm so sorry if you can hear my neighbors throughout this video. I live in a very noisy apartment complex, and this, I guess, just going forward, you may hear a lot of noises in my videos, and there's really nothing I can do about that. So to that degree, events like that of like pregnancy and death, those are like general human experiences that most people kind of encounter in their life. Like if you live long enough, you will either have a partner who becomes pregnant, or you will become pregnant, or you will have friends with kids, or you will be an aunt or an uncle. Like pregnancy will affect you, grief will affect you. That makes sense. Then there are things that don't make sense, that absolutely are physically impossible, that could not actually happen in reality. Like there is no chance in hell that this is humanly possible. It's just like a 0% chance that it's real. Nonetheless, your brain will respond the same way it would as if it really happened. So traumatic things, even if it's like being abducted by aliens or being tortured in hell, your mind will react as it would if that were real. So alien abductions, being tortured in hell, these are absolutely things that have happened to me, as in they didn't really happen, but my mind responded as it would, like appropriately to that situation. So yeah, that's not possible, but I am traumatized and I know what that feels like. I can absolutely feel with certainty what it would feel like to go through with something completely impossible. The thing about trauma is that your body is inherently like able to respond to trauma without really caring what kind of trauma it is. If something happens to you that is distressing, there will be like a physiological switch in you that says, oh, this is traumatic, I'm going to respond. I'm going to go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. I'm going to respond accordingly. This is just my protection mechanism to like protect this person. And so it doesn't care what the trauma is. It doesn't care like the severity of the trauma. It is simply a response within you. So anything from car accidents to near-death experiences to bullying can be traumatic to you. It doesn't matter what it is. Some of my worst trauma is so deeply ingrained in me that I still haven't been able to talk about it in therapy. It's something that I think about almost every day, not because I want to, but because I still have intrusive thoughts of these delusions that I really did go through. So what didn't happen to me was dying by being burned alive and looking at my body and seeing myself covered in flames and having those thoughts of, oh my God, I'm dying. My life is over. There's so much I still want to do. Oh my God, I'm panicking. And now I've accepted my fate and I'm dead. Like I've died a lot of times in a lot of ways. I've been hanged, I've been poisoned, I've been buried alive. So anything that could be associated with that, like how a person would feel, I have felt, and it's terrifying. I have felt as if I was tortured by surgeons who took me apart and then put me back together and attached me to other bodies. But all of the bodies were dead and I was alive. And this is something that passes through my mind every single day, and it is the worst one that has happened to me. And I like literally cringe, like I have a physical response when it comes to my mind because I have to like wince it out of my mind. It is so troubling to just be reminded constantly of this horrific thing. And also at the same time, accept that that never happened to me. And that wasn't real. So I do have PTSD from things that never happened because I didn't know they weren't real. They really happened to me on some level. On some level, that was a real thing that actually happened to me. I just didn't know that it wasn't. So I'm processing a lot of things, even just like a secondhand experience of seeing things that aren't real and just being a witness to that is traumatizing. You can have PTSD from witnessing traumatic events. And if you want to take away the fact that it didn't really happen to me, it still was something I witnessed and I felt and I internalized as anyone else would if they were in that situation. I am working on it in therapy. It's a long process. And interestingly enough, I do have CPTSD from childhood trauma, physical abuse, emotional and mental abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, a near-death experience, and bullying. And so I've had a lot of trauma. My trauma spanned about 20 years before it finally stopped, maybe more. And this, like even one episode that lasted 9 months is a lot worse than all of that combined, because what I experienced in psychosis, especially the surgeon delusion, is so much worse than anything that could possibly happen in reality. And having lived through things that are more terrifying than what you could actually feel in reality, it has wrecked my mind. I do want to recognize though that there are a lot of people who have psychosis that don't share these experiences, and I don't want to shed a bad light on the community that we are all these like traumatized PTSD zombies who have lived through the worst horrors imaginable. That's not true of everyone. That is true of me, and it was pretty bad. But there are actually people who have like pleasant hallucinations and see beautiful things and have very lovely delusions and feel confident. I don't know, they actually have a good time. I've never had a good time, but there are people who do. So I don't want this video to be a reflection of the entire community, because there are absolutely people who have a good time in psychosis. I'm just not one of them. Anyway, I hope that better explains what psychosis is like for some people and how bad it can be, because people don't tend to realize that just because it isn't real doesn't mean it's not experienced as if it's real. There's no differentiating for people with psychosis. Like, you can't always tell what is or isn't real, so it's very easy to have the exact same experience that you would in reality outside of reality. So interesting how the brain works, so amazing how it can respond the same way to things that aren't real and are real. Anyway, that's just like a little introduction to PTSD and psychosis.